to Hamilton.
Nice to be here, Mike.
I pulled out my now famous duct-taped Leonard Feather book from about '68, and I wanted to read something and wonder if you actually said this. It said, your ambition is to become one of the top 5 baritone sax players in jazz. And well, since you did that about 25 years ago, what's your more recent goal?
I don't know. My recent goal is to survive. I originally said that because I was in the process of figuring out whether I was going to be a baritone sax player or just be an alto player, which was my first saxophone. But through the efforts of Harry Carney, who always kept encouraging me to be a baritone player, so I figured, well, between Harry Carney and all these other guys like Jerry Mulligan and all that, that's like 3 or 4. So if I could just be one of the 5 guys, you know. But so it was that kind of thing, you know. And, and I don't even think I said it to be, you know, printed in concrete.
Right.
You know, it was just an offhand conversation to somebody. I think it was Ira Gittler. Or
I was wondering
somebody.
how that, when he did that, did he have different people going out and
as I remember, yeah. I just spoke to Ira a couple of weeks ago, and they were supposed to put the latest edition out a year ago in November. You know, Leonard Feather died.
Yeah.
So things kind of slowed up, and Ira was left with a big responsibility. And as you know now, we have, it was kind of easy to put that kind of a book together back in the old days. Now we have millions of jazz players. Everybody in the world plays jazz.
Right.
So we can't get everybody in the world in one book.
Yeah.
So it takes a long time.
It's like, where do you draw the line between
Right.
playing the next? I know the Grove.
Is Kenny G going to get in there, or you know?
That would be almost worth putting him in there just to read the press, you know, just to see the letters you'd get.
But it's a monumental effort to put that book together, and it's going to be a while probably before the next one comes out. But it's nice to be in the books.
Yeah. Yeah, you have a nice write-up in the Grove, actually. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's very nice. Also in the, there's a big compilation just came out of many, many jazz CDs, and you're in there with some nice reviews of your work.
Ah,
you said you're alto first. Is that from school?
You want to go right from the beginning?
Well, you know, it all started when you saw your first what?
No, my first instrument was clarinet.
Yeah.
I had an uncle that lived in, my younger uncle, who was about 10 years older than I am, took clarinet lessons, and he was very bad. But he used to leave his clarinet up on the mantelpiece, and then he would go out and play. And then I used to sit and watch him, so I would just take his clarinet and play it. So in other words, I figured out how he fingered and what it was supposed to sound like, so I figured out all the notes, and that was it. So my grandfather happened to come in one day, his father, and he thought it was his son playing. And here was this, you know, little kid fooling around with this thing, and right away he went to my father and said, get this guy a clarinet and get him some lessons. Well, I proceeded to get a new metal Cavalier clarinet, and I took about maybe 2 or 3 months of clarinet lessons, as I remember, and hated every bit of it because I didn't realize that at the time I was playing by ear. And the teacher that I had was an old Italian fellow that if you made mistakes, he would hit you on the fingers with a ruler or something. Needless to say, I was getting my fingers bashed. But he would always make the mistake of playing something first. And then after I heard it, I would repeat it. But he thought I was reading it. Well, my comeuppance was the day he found out that I wasn't reading. And he had a fit. And it was like he turned me in to my father. You know, it's like he's not going to be able to do anything. So believe it or not, Monk, that was the end of any formal training I ever had.
No kidding.
So I am self-taught.
I have to say that kind of story we've heard before, and that the teachers at that time, first of all, were very strict.
Right.
Jerry Jerome said something about that
they had, and also
the teacher hit him, and he went home and told his father, and his father hit him. but the fact that you were playing by ear was not good enough. And
right, and also the material that he was training me to play was not what I wanted to play. So I used to play with the radio. I would listen, most of the, well, you may not have been around then, But most of the band leaders back then played clarinet. It was Benny Goodman, Artie Shaw, Jimmy Dorsey, Woody Herman. Clarinet was all over the place.
Yeah.
So I used to just play along with the radio, and most of the pop music of the day was the big band music. So that's what I grew up. I learned a million tunes, not really knowing that I was learning tunes.
Yeah.
And then came the 50s, I heard Stan Kenton's band. And that band stuck out because the harmonies in that band had nothing to do with the harmonies I had heard before. Then I heard Claude Thornhill Band, and all of a sudden my ears started to be intrigued by the more advanced harmony.
Right.
And I started to play that way on the clarinet, and all of a sudden I was getting criticized. You know, you're playing wrong notes. You know, back then it was like forbidden territory. Then all of a sudden the saxophone came into vogue. My first biggest influence in my life on saxophone was Paul Desmond.
Can I wind back just for a second?
Sure.
The grandfather you mentioned, was he the one that played with John Philip Sousa?
Yes. How that came about was he was not a... My grandfather was born in Italy, and he was a musician first. And then when he got married and came to the United States, he had to support a family, so he became a tailor. And he played gigs on the side. And a few times he was called to play with the Sousa band. And Sousa wanted him to, you know, be part of the memory. He was a great tuba player. And my grandmother said, no dice, you know, you got to stay home and make a living. So he wound up actually still being a great musician, staying home. He wound up playing tuba in marching bands and concert bands, which I used to go with him all the time. He always used to take me to hear these old like Italian concert bands and parade bands. And so he was kind of my idol. When I grew up, I wanted to put on a uniform and march in a parade. And yeah, he was always encouraging me to play music.
Now, the tunes that you were hearing from the radio, jazz was really the popular music of the day, or
it was
a
dance
form
music.
of jazz.
Yeah, it was dance music, and World War II had a lot to do with some of the music that came out. There was a lot of sentimentality, you know, the soldier going off to war, the family waiting for him. There was the communication. Music was a very big communicator. It kept things together. I mean, we don't have email and computers and stuff like that today. So the music was kind of the bond between the soldier being away and the family home, and also just life in general was centered around music. Music had a lot to do with the 30s, 40s, and early 50s.
And that it was played more in the home, on the piano.
Very little television, so you put on records or you listen to the radio. And on the radio, you could hear a lot of these band broadcasts. You know, half the time you could hardly hear it, you know, but it was enough to pique your interest and keep your interest in the music. But that was the case, you know, it was just the pop music of the day just happened to be that kind of music, which happened to be one of the very big foundations of jazz music.
Right. You were a pretty young boy during the war years, right?
I was born in '36, so that makes me like 10 years old after the war was over.
Do you have memories of?
Oh yeah.
Of what kind of things were going on from a family sense that might
Well, I remember one day my father was a doctor. My father was a general practitioner, and because there was a shortage of doctors, most of the younger doctors went off to war. He stayed behind, and we had, I think our city of Troy at the time was 85,000, I'm taking a guess, but there were maybe like 50, 60 doctors, and that was it, to service all those people. So he was very busy, and I can remember we had air raids, assuming we were going to be bombed. So you'd have to shut all the lights out, so the whole city would be pitch black. But guys like myself were given little tiny lanterns with like 3-watt bulbs in them. And our job was to stand on the street corner with the lantern and assist people.
Okay.
And I thought that was great. Like I was almost like a soldier, you know. So they gave me this little lantern, and every time we'd hear the air raid sirens, they'd turn the lights out. I'd walk out and walk up to the corner and stand there with my light. And on the other corner would be another kid. And, you know, we were like in the war. We were
Yeah.
fighting the war, too. In fact, we were looking for the Germans on that street that night, you know. But I have memories of that,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, being involved, and also some of the guys on my block got killed, you know, they didn't come home. And the families, you know, I could always remember the big, you know, sorrow that was generated by that, you know, so-and-so just got killed in Germany, you know, and then the next thing you'd know, there'd be a star on his mother's window, you know.
Did you probably had some German residents in Troy?
Oh, sure.
Did they
yeah.
take
It was a
any
melting pot where I lived. It was South Troy, which was mostly Italians, Polish people, Germans, a lot of Jewish people there. And I went to school that I'd say 30 or 40% of my class were black. So I really lived in a melting pot area and got, you know, and my father was a doctor to all those people.
Did the German residents take any kind of heat from your neighbor?
I can remember hearing stories of the generation before me. All of them took heat. The Irish gave heat to the Italians gave heat to, you know, it was that kind of thing. It was a rivalry between the neighborhoods.
Yeah.
But I think the war did something. It pulled everybody together, and everybody was together. You know, some people refer to it as the last great war, I guess. You know, in other words, you couldn't write a Hollywood script any better than World War II. You know, we got attacked, and in, you know, a very short time, we're able to beat the rest of the world.
Yeah.
We were the good guys.
Your school experience in a multiracial atmosphere, did it affect your attitudes at all in later life?
What it did do was give me a well-rounded idea of what was going on. And when I started to play jazz, I had to deal with all that. Better that than being in a sheltered situation, not really knowing what life was about. Not that I knew exactly what life was about, but I knew a lot of black people. I knew their humor. I knew their contributions to the culture, and the Polish people and the Italians. I mean, I grew up with all that kind of music. Like when I used to go out and play weddings as a kid, we played Polish hops, and we played Italian tarantellas, and we played blues, and we did all that. So I was always used to this kind of thing. So when I moved to New York and got involved with jazz music, I was home.
What about, did you fit into the school band situation? Or?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Actually, I did fool my high school teacher. I was first clarinet in the concert band and in the marching band, and what else was there? The orchestra. Couldn't read a note. Luckily, the guy next to me was a great reader.
And you had big ears.
Yeah, I had a real good sound. In fact, my grandfather always referred to it as the voice. He always used to say in broken Italian, you have the voice, the sound, whatever that meant. In later years, I guess I kind of got the message, because if you hear me play clarinet, I do have some kind of a classical sound in a sense, and I never studied. I mean, it was just, that was the sound I heard all the time. I discussed this with Buddy DeFranco one time, and he had the same kind of background, really, and grew up as a little Italian kid playing the clarinet. But you hear all these Italian marches and all these clarinet things, you know, and that sound kind of, it's a classical sound, but it's got a little bit more emotion in it or something. I don't know. Anyway, I got to the point where if we haven't received a new piece in school, on the side, would get the fellow next to me to, I'd say, I would look at it, and I didn't know what that was. I'd say, play that for me. And he'd play it, and then I'd play it, and then I'd memorize it, and that would be it. So I used to sit there and look at the music, but I might as well have been reading a Superman comic book. And I played for 2 years, and the conductor never knew. Maybe he did know. I don't know. Now that I'm older, I think that guy knew, but he just didn't want to. He wanted me in the band.
He liked your sound, so he, yeah.
But that was it, you know. And then just to continue that while we were there, I was told that don't be a professional musician. You know, go to school, because when you fail as a professional musician, you'll have something to fall back on. So I applied and somehow got into Ithaca College. Wasn't really able to read music well.
As a music major?
As a
you got
music
it.
major.
Yeah.
And as a clarinet major. Never attended a, I'm at a loss for words as to the, where you get together in a group, like ensembles? Yeah, I guess
Yeah,
ensembles.
sure.
I never attended ensembles. You know the great Walter Beeler?
Yeah, the band
Walter
person.
Beeler called me into the office one day. He said, "You've been here for 6 months and you haven't showed up to one ensemble. What is your problem?" And I said, "I can't read music." And he almost hit the ceiling. "What do you mean you can't read music? How'd you get into this school?" I said, "I don't know." So I played for him, and he'd laugh. It was like, you can play, but you can't read? Anyway, that was it. Somehow I had a mental block against reading.
Mm-hmm.
I was afraid to do it, almost like scared to apply myself to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody would say, what you can do, you can't learn. Reading is a mechanical thing. It's easy. I'll show you how, and I'd sit down, and I just never could get it. But eventually I got it by the exact same way I learned how to play, just by listening, looking at rhythmical figures and seeing them over and over again, and I knew how they went.
Yeah.
And then sitting, when I was with Woody Herman's band, when I first went with him, I wasn't a great reader, but I could read adequately. I would sit on a bus and sit there and subdivide and count. That's how I learned how to read.
Yeah.
And I think, as you know, reading is something you have to do,
More
I think,
now
a
than-
lot.
Yeah,
If
sure.
you do it a lot, you're good at it. It's like anything else.
Right.
But I didn't want to be in a big band. Big bands never really interested me. I just wanted to play jazz. I just wanted to play what I heard.
You went on to Berkeley, right?
I won the
You got the
first
first
scholarship
scholarship.
offered there, yeah. Stayed there a year. Same thing, couldn't read, but I was in all the ensembles. In fact, Herb Pomeroy actually had another baritone player sit there and read the parts, and I took all the solos. But I would look over his shoulder and watch him read, and that's helped me to learn how to read, too.
When did you first get on the baritone?
Oh, actually in 1956, maybe. My alto was, this is on the back of one of my albums, I can't remember which one, but my alto needed some repair, and as usual, I'd take it to the music store, and they always let me take an alto. They had no altos, but they had a baritone, so I said, I don't want to play that. He said, "Well, you're only going to play it tonight, take it. It's just like an alto, only it's bigger. You just got to blow harder." That's what he told me. So I took it on the gig, and I didn't like it at all, and everybody else liked it, though. The rest of the band said, "Oh, man, you should play that." Not me. I don't want to play this. And I don't know, I kind of filed that, what it felt like to play it, in the back of my mind. Then about 6 months later, I had a chance to buy a baritone, real cheap, so I bought it. And one thing led to another. I would play alto, but every once in a while I'd pick up the baritone. And I noticed that every time I picked up the baritone, I got more reaction from people, critics too. Like, I was on the downbeat pole when I was 20 years old because of the baritone,
Yeah.
not because of the alto. So I realized that this might be a ticket, to get in the door, but I didn't like the horn. I just didn't like it. I heard and felt alto. And then I was at the Cafe Bohemia playing there because we were voted the best college jazz group in the United States at Ithaca that year, and part of the prize was to play the Randall's Island Jazz Festival and to appear for a week at the Cafe Bohemia. So we were opposite. In fact, Ronnie Zito, a great drummer from this area, was in that band. We appeared opposite Buddy Rich for a week.
Wow.
And critics and people started to come in and listen to the schoolboys play jazz. And I was getting all the press. And one night I looked up and Jerry Mulligan was sitting right in front of me, smiling, and I looked at him, and I kind of knew who he was. I wasn't a big fan of his style of playing the baritone, but I mean, I respected him for who he was. When I got off the bandstand, he wanted to look at my mouthpiece. He liked the mouthpiece I had, which was an old Brillhart. I still have it. And he played my horn, and he said, "You want to sell this mouthpiece?" And that was the only mouthpiece I ever had. So I said, "Gee, no, it's all I have, He said, "Well, come on, I want you to meet somebody." He took me to the bar, and he introduced me to Harry Carney. And at that point, in fact, there's a book out called The World of Duke Ellington by Stanley Dance.
Yes.
And in the Harry Carney section, he mentions the night he met me at the Cafe Bohemia with Jerry Mulligan. But anyway, I met him that night, and right until he died, we were very good friends. I mean, I used to go see that band every chance I could get to see them, and he always was encouraging me you should play the baritone. You're a baritone player. Play the baritone. So I don't know, one thing led to another, and it was a love-hate relationship. In fact, it still is sometimes. You know, I'd rather play alto many other nights.
It's pretty heavy, too.
Yeah, the older I get, it gets a little heavier. Yeah. Trying to get somebody to make a fiberglass one, you know, that comes apart and fits in a box about this big. But anyway, it's been that kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. But I got to the point where, okay, if I'm going to play this thing, then I'm going to really play it. And I always attacked it that way. Mm-hmm. And I always say attack because it's a big fight.
Yeah.
Every time I pick it up, it's a fight. Whereas the alto, I think I'm just an alto player, really, that plays baritone. I always feel I hear the alto better. I feel.
Well, your fluency on it sounds like you're thinking alto.
Well,
almost.
And I always play the high end. If you'll notice, that's another reason I tried to extend the range of the baritone to give me more high end. Mm-hmm. Also, no other horn has the range that horn has. If you do extend the high range, so. I feel I've contributed something to the advancement of the horn, but more than that, I really enjoy playing it. And when I'm in my top shape, I fear no one.
Yeah, all right.
But I'd still rather be an alto player.
I think the die's been cast, actually.
Love-hate relationship, that's it.
Well, there's a lot of different kinds of music happening in the 50s. Did you get into, either by economic necessity or whatever,
I got into all of it, believe me.
Into all of it.
You're from around here, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you familiar with Sylvan Beach?
Sure.
Okay. I played there when I was a kid with a rhythm and blues band. In fact, in rehashing those years with people that know me and musicians from around here, I realized that we were all kind of doing the same thing but didn't know each other, because I came from Albany, basically. But I played rhythm and blues. I played, actually swung from a trapeze upside down playing alto.
Get out.
Oh, yeah. We were on the road, and there was a group that used to appear on the Ed Sullivan Show. They were Las Vegas's biggest act. They were called the Goofers. And they played rhythm and blues, and they did comedy and everything. But one of the gimmicks was the sax player would swing on a trapeze. So we were playing in St. Louis, and the guy had left his trapeze. So I got on it, started fooling around, and the guy said, "You think you can do that tonight?" And I said, "I'll try." Well, that lasted about a week because I got dizzy a few times and almost killed myself, so I never got on the trapeze again. But there was another guy that came from this area, Jimmy Cavallo.
Sure.
In the House Rockers.
Yeah.
And Jimmy showed me how to walk the bar, you know. So I did all that. But rhythm and blues enabled me to learn how to, it put me in a situation where I could improvise. I'd just blow anything I want. In other words, I'd be up there kind of thinking and hearing Paul Desmond, but I'd be honking, you know, and I would be playing all those harmonic things I heard the Claude Thornhill band play when we're playing, like, you know, some current rock tune from the day, you know, like Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley, nothing but a blues, right?
Yeah.
So once we played the head and it started to blow, I just blew. I was Sonny Rollins at that point, you know. But I learned how to play that way. And then I used to go sit in at jam sessions and in strange towns and learn tunes and sit in with people. And that's kind of how I learned how to play. That was school for me.
I guess it's unfortunate that that kind of scene is not so prevalent today.
Yeah, I always say that. I would hate to be a young musician growing up today, because there's good and bad to it, you know, like positive and negative to all angles. But most of the musicians I hear today are cookie cutter kind of people, you know. Nothing wrong in that, in a sense. I mean, there's some great musicians, and I hear technical ability, and I hear all kinds of great things, but I don't hear individuality as much as I used to hear. And the individuality came about as everybody at that point learned how to play on their own. So you had all these little different flowers blooming, you know. Now all the flowers kind of look alike and sound alike, and they're great, but it's a whole other thing.
Did you get to a point, as you're playing mostly by ear, later on, did you start to learn some theory and then say, oh, that's what I was doing?
Oh, yeah.
I'm already doing it.
Yeah, in fact, I was on a panel one time, and some guy said, he said, what you did was you wrote the book first, and then you learned how to spell and pronounce and create sentences. And I kind of thought about that, and I said, gee, I guess so, because I didn't know what I was doing. All I knew was it sounded right. And I didn't know why, but it was right. And I would argue all night long that it was right, but I had no way of proving it. So that kind of said, you better learn what you're doing. So the ego is a great big thing. It's like I didn't want to let anybody know that I didn't know what I was doing. So I would coyly ask questions. Instead of coming right out and say, hey, what is a D minor seventh? I would say to a pianist, show me how you voice a D. How do you voice different ways on D minor seventh on a piano? So I'd see the guy play, and then I would memorize those hand positions. And then I'd sit home and figure out what a D minor seventh was. And meanwhile, this guy thought that I was, just asking a general question when I really didn't know anything. Then I found out that there was only 12 keys. And if you bring it up a half step, it's a E flat minor seventh, and the picture came to me, and that's basically how I learned. But to be honest with you, when I'm up there playing now, I'm still that kid playing by ear. I don't think of anything when I'm playing. And I've had people ask me that. I mean, occasionally I do think. I mean, some tunes have different forms, and some tunes demand a little bit more attention, when you're playing them so you won't get lost, and they have certain idiosyncrasies. So I think at those points. But when I'm just playing a tune that I played for years or something that is a familiar form, I'm free as a bird at that point.
Well, I would love to see some of the, occasionally in some of the jazz magazines, especially the educational ones, you'll see someone transcribe a solo and analyze it, and they'll often say, notice how the player has taken this particular scale and did this tertiary turnaround and blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking to myself, maybe, but maybe not.
Well, that's happened to me. I've had people transcribe in fact, my solos, a lot of my solos have appeared in some of those magazines. And what's funny is they'll send me the solo, and I look at it. First of all, it's very difficult for me to read. Second of all, they're asking me if it's right. And I said, in other words, I've got to go listen to my record now and figure out if all these notes are right. So I always used to say, yeah, it's right. I would send it back in and say, yeah, it's right. Because, I wasn't thinking of, it wasn't that way. I just played it. And if you want to write it down, transcribe it, and study it, that's fine. But I mean, it's not like the Bible. It's one chorus in a lifetime. Then there's many more choruses that have come after that, and many more hopefully will come.
Right.
So I mean, but as a learning device, I realize the value of transcribing everything. But I think too much emphasis is on that sometimes.
Yeah.
And also this pseudo-intellectual application to it sometimes, like you were saying. It's like, this third bar is pure genius, and when it just happened. I mean, if it is, that's great.
Maybe that's the genius of it, that it just happened.
Yeah. So in other words, like if you study this and you apply this, you will be a genius too. That's what I don't like about it. But I think there's a little bit too much emphasis on the educational aspect of it. Not that there shouldn't be education, but it's not the end all. And that's why I think a lot of the players, to me, are boring to listen to. I mean, I hear some great players, and I hear some great talented people that, had they been in my generation, would probably really have blossomed. But in this context, in this generation, are not gonna, because conditions and the environment and just other situations that do exist are not conducive for that person to advance to their potential.
Right. That's really interesting. I want to go back to, you mentioned Paul Desmond, which surprises me a little bit.
Oh, it surprises a million people. It even surprises me sometimes, but I'm constantly hearing that guy.
Yeah.
I got to know him. I got to know him in his later years. I met him a few times when I was a kid, but the thing that appealed to me was his simplicity. And I certainly don't play simple all the time, but there's a certain lyrical simplicity that he has that makes me play a certain way. And not that he was the only guy. I mean, Miles certainly influenced me too, but Paul as a saxophone player, being the first, they say you never forget your first love, like a woman or whatever. It's like I don't forget my first influence, and he just played some great things. His earlier records really knocked me out. In fact, my favorite album, just for the record, is Dave Brubeck at Oberlin. And I mentioned it to Paul one time. It's the best he ever played. He didn't. It was downhill from there, you know.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I always enjoyed his playing, but that was the album I lived with. And if you listen to it, he played with such excitement and such energy. And I mentioned it to him one time, and he just looked at me and smiled. It was like, yeah, I kind of remember that night. And if you listen to the record, the whole group was popping, you know, which it didn't always do. But he was a very big influence. And, you know, just a kid, you know, the first idol. Like,
Yeah.
out here is this little short Italian, stocky kid that wanted to look like a 6-foot tall, thin guy with horn-rimmed glasses, you know. I used to try to stand like him, you know, and even tried to get a mouthpiece like he had one time until I found out they don't, Gregory mouthpieces were very hard to find.
Oh.
But, you know, it was that kind of hero worship.
Sure.
But then as I grew up, I got out of that, but I still appreciate the lyricism that guy had. I mean, he was just great.
Yeah, there was a certain sound to that group. I had an experience of just hearing Take 5 one day on the car radio, and I said, man, that's it. What is that? And that kind of starts a whole process maybe of going from one thing to the next. And
right, exactly. And, you know, of course, then I got turned on to Charlie Parker and the usual. I kept going forward and backwards. Every time I ran out of inspiration, I would go back. And then I'd run out of that and I'd jump forward, listen to some new guys, and back and forth, back and forth. But every once in a while, there's old Paul sitting there. I just recently recorded an album with a 51-piece orchestra, the Metropole Orchestra in Holland. And I did a version of East of the Sun. And in the midst of all this, I don't know if you ever played with an orchestra, you probably have, but there's a feeling that you just can't duplicate when you're right in the middle of all this strings and harps, and all of a sudden this big sound hits you, and you're just free as a bird, and you're flying over this, you know. And I started to play, and all of a sudden, this quote that Desmond played came out of me, and it's a very hip quote. I don't want to get too technical, but he starts on the tritone substitution of the melody, and he just played. So I played what he played. I hinted at what he played, but then I took it somewhere else. But he was there with me that day.
That's
you
great.
know, it's just like
all those years later.
many years later, I still am influenced by him.
Yeah. Let's see. Cal Jader, you moved out to the West Coast, or did you just?
No,
kind of...
I was visiting the West Coast. My parents decided to take a cross-country drive, and last minute I decided to go with them. And I had heard about this music called West Coast Jazz, so I was kind of, you know, going to check that out. So we arrived in San Francisco. My aunt and uncle lived there, and we were staying with them. And I read about this place called the Black Hawk, which is where Brubeck got his start, and Cal Jader happened to be playing there. And I didn't know who Cal Jader was, but I went down there, took my horn. They had a jam session on a Sunday, as I remember it. And I walked in and walked right up to Cal and said, I'd like to sit in. He said, you know, where are you from? And I told him. At the time, he had Vince Guaraldi on piano, Al McKibben on bass, Willie Bobo on regular drums, and Mongo Santa Maria on conga drums.
Wow. And which horn did you have?
Baritone.
Okay.
So I sat in, and I wound up, he hired me. There was a Cuban tenor player playing with him, and he was leaving to go back to New York. And Cal kind of all of a sudden liked the baritone sound. You know, the baritone and the vibes was a little bit different. So I played, I don't know, I think I played 5 or 6 of those jam session things that I did, because on the weekends, he had the regular quintet had their own thing without the saxophone player. But I got to play, and all of a sudden, people were coming around in San Francisco, like the writers and people from the San Francisco papers, and all of a sudden I started to get like a little reputation, but I came back to New York with my family, and then I said, well, I'm going to move out here. So the following year I did move out there, and I stayed about 6 months, and I worked, that's when you know that album, Cannonball at the Jazz Workshop?
Yeah.
I was there. We used to play the workshop. And I first got to play with Wes Montgomery, because there was another group out there called the Master Sounds. Buddy Montgomery, Monk's brother, and Wes's brother, and Montgomery played bass. Anyway, they had a group, and they kept talking about their brother, Wes Montgomery, from home
Yeah.
who played great guitar, and he was coming out to visit them. And he did. He came out, and they put him with an organ trio. It was an organ, drums, and guitar. So I went in, and I was in the men's room, and Wes Montgomery came in, and I knew who he was, you know. So I said to him, "I know your brothers," and I just got through playing with him, and they said, "Oh," he said, "well, get your horn and come on up." So I wound up playing with Wes, and then about a year later, he was big time in New York. You know, he was recording, and he was Wes Montgomery.
Yeah.
But there were great times out there. But the problem was there wasn't enough work and enough, what was the word, inspiration or creative juices were not happening for me out there. I had to come back to New York.
Yeah.
So I did.
In New York, what was 52nd Street like when you were?
It was very easy I had access. You could go in and out of all the clubs. Like I used to pay $1.50, go in and sit in the Peanut Gallery in Birdland. You didn't have to buy a drink. The Peanut Gallery was an area to the left of the bandstand where if you didn't want to drink, you just wanted to hear the music, you paid your $1.50 and sat there. It was the greatest seat in the house because you were right on top of the bandstand. So I used to try to get the end seat or the end block of seats because that always put me like I would be this far away from Thelonious Monk's fingers and you know, all the great piano players. And you'd be right on the bandstand. And like Sonny Rollins when he made that a couple of trio albums there. I mean, you were sitting right there for $1.50. But it was easy to park, and you know, like I said before the interview, we were talking about it, how it was. It was very accessible. I remember. You remember Joe Farrell, tenor player?
Sure.
Joe Farrell and I used to play club dates, and then like it'd be 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, and we'd get on the subway and go up to Harlem and sit in up there, and we were accepted. I mean, you know, we weren't, if we were jazz musicians, you were in. Nobody bothered us, and I mean, you felt completely safe, within reason. I mean, you know, there's always some.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I've been curious about the racial interaction in jazz and if it's changed over the years.
I think there was always some kind of a racial problem. I mean, obviously, you know, from the black end, it was definitely a big problem. From the white end of it, we used to refer to it as Crow Jim, you know, reverse racism, whereas if you were white, you really didn't have a right to play this music. And some white musicians actually gave up music. I mean, actually believed that. And my belief is, you know, it sounds cliche, but I mean, it doesn't matter what color you are. If you can play, you can play. So I used to say, okay, we can't play. I can't play. Come on up on the bandstand. Let's see who can play. And let's see who can't play. You know, you can talk all night long, but put your money where your mouth is. And that usually settled most of the problems. But on the other hand, it still does exist today on both ends. And I think it's a problem we're going to have for eternity.
Yeah.
And I mean, we got to learn to live with it. And the other thing is we can't take it as seriously as most people. You know, it's like if somebody says this little thing, it's politically incorrect. And, I mean, it's to the point now where it's ridiculous. And I think that's half the problem. Let's not take it, let's try to relax and just try to get along. And the next thing you know, it'll happen, you know?
Yeah.
If you listen to some of the white musicians from the 50s, they say that, you know, they got along fine with everybody. Well, maybe from their end it looked that way, but maybe it wasn't. You know, who knows? I wasn't really on the scene at that level then, so I can't really comment on it. But I've heard it from both ends, and everybody said everything was cool. But I don't know, I wonder.
What about today? You think?
Yeah.
You know, when you go to the jazz parties, for instance, almost 100% of the audience is white. The only time I noticed different was on a jazz cruise, where it was much more mixed. But it seems like the majority of the musicians are white too.
At the jazz parties?
Yeah.
I've played a number of them. There may be a few favorites, you know, that are white, but I don't know. I played like the Dick Gibson Jazz Party, which was the daddy of them all. He always had. I mean, we had a lot of blacks there. I mean, that's how I met most of them. You know,
Right.
I got to meet people I would never have met had I not gone to these jazz parties. People like Marshall Royal, and I mean, hanging with these guys and talking with them. And,
Yeah.
just to give you a quick thing here, I was looking for the altissimo fingerings on the clarinet, trying to get up in the high register, and I talked to Buddy DeFranco, Dick Johnson, Peanuts Hucko, Kenny DeVerne, Bob Wilbur. These are all great clarinet players, right? You know who showed me the best fingerings?
Marshall Royal.
Marshall Royal.
Wow.
And then Marshall says, I said to him, I said, you're only a dumb saxophone player, and you showed me these clarinet fingerings. He started to laugh. He says, yeah, well, people don't know that I was a clarinet player. I was a clarinet major. That was his axe. His fingerings, till this day, work for me. All the other fingerings are like, try this, maybe this will work, try that. Marshall was right on the money. But I mean, I got to hang with Lockjaw Davis. When would I have been able to, you know? So these parties were really a great thing. But for the most part, a lot of it is comprised of very tired music. I won't say great music or good music, but it's been overdone, and it's just, you hear the same tunes. And after a while, I see the same people in the audiences sometimes at different parties. They make a living of going around being in the audience at these jazz parties, and don't they get tired of hearing, you know, the same old tunes?
I think it's probably kind of a social
it's a
thing to
happening.
show.
It's a happening.
You know, if a musician today wanted to get into that circuit, what do they have to, besides they have to play good, but is there other things, I mean, like there's a standard repertory that you have to...
You just better know a lot of tunes from the 20s right up through the 50s, and you better be able to put your ego at the door and be able to fit in. I always looked at it as being a great character actor. You know, if you're an actor on a stage, you can't go in there being the big star, but if you're a great character actor and somebody says, okay, at 2 o'clock, you're going to be in this group band, like Jay McShann's playing piano, Ray Brown's playing drums, Phil Wood's playing alto, and Bob Wilbur's playing clarinet, you know, all of a sudden, you're saying, wait a minute, you know, what are we going to play? Well, we'll tell you that when you get there, but you better be ready to play this role. And I think the more you can do that, the more success you have. I used to see musicians come in like they're going to do their thing, and they weren't back there the next time. So, I mean, there's a point to where you've got to be one of the crowd. And it's fun. I won't mention any names, but a musician, when I first did one of these parties, I was very disappointed because I was kind of with that head, I'm going to go in and play what I do best, and I'm going to try to be as good as I can. And then I realized that they were just cutting my legs off. They were putting me in positions and putting me with musicians that wouldn't allow me to do what So I was kind of depressed, and I was sitting there, and this guy, famous alto player, said to me, cheer up, he says. Where else could you be with all these great musicians? It's a holiday. He says, look at it this way. He said, it's nice to have a gig once a year that has nothing to do with music. Which I thought was a great line.
Wow.
And you might, I'll tell you later who said that, but you probably know already.
Well, yeah.
But
I mean,
after I heard that, it put everything in perspective, and I laughed, and I was able to laugh at that point.
Right.
And I said, you know, he's right.
Right.
Not that you shouldn't get up and play as good as you can, but don't take it so seriously, you know, and just enjoy the situation. And
well, there's an art to that too.
Oh yeah. Playing
within the correct context.
Exactly.
You know.
Well, I've always considered myself that kind of musician. Eclectic is the word. That's it. I had one of the first electric fusion bands back in the late 60s.
I was going to ask about that.
I think I was one of the first guys to run an alto sax through a wah-wah pedal. And I had guys like Dave Holland in my band, and you know, guys that just left Miles. And I remember one time coming home and listening on the radio, and I was with a bass player, and I said, geez, that sounds like us. And it was Weather Report. Oh. This was back in the late 60s. So I was into that. I played with Dewey Redman, and I played some avant-garde music, and you know, these are experiences that, to me, I draw upon every time I get up to play, because every situation is different. If I get with a pianist that plays more traditional, I kind of start going in that groove, you know, and kind of hold the fort there. And if I can feel I can't expand that, I'm able to jump into another direction because of the experience I've had. Then all of a sudden, if there's a piano player there that's harmonically a little bit more advanced, say, okay, I can go here with this guy. You know, all of a sudden I know what I can do and what I can't do. So each time is a very individual kind of situation. And if you have all these other experiences to draw from, you never run out of gas.
Yeah.
I played with Vic Dickinson and Doc Cheatham. I played, you know, Dixieland with these guys. I worked gigs with them. I mean, they had their own thing going, you know, their own humor, their own way of doing things. And I worked within that context, you know. So when I come to these jazz parties, some of these same guys, Doc Cheatham, I worked with him 20 years ago. All of a sudden, I'm on the bandstand again with him. So it was like old home week.
That's
At the same time, you sit down and do a duo thing with Roger Kellaway, and you need a radar machine to find the harmony sometimes. And we're doing it at a jazz party. It's just like, but it works because we happen to be playing the theme of a familiar tune.
wow.
And we departed from it, took it where we wanted, and came back. And they always remember the ending. And if you come back with the melody, they're cool. You know? Meanwhile, they've allowed us to take this space trip.
Wow.
But I think that's how I've been able to survive, is being that character actor musically, being able to fit in any situation.
Yeah.
And I take gigs sometimes that other jazz musicians probably wouldn't take, but I always find, to me, it's just another experience, and I'm gonna do the best I can. I remember one time when I had that fusion band, it was on a Saturday. I played a church service. I played alto flute that morning in a church service. And then from 12 to 4, I played in a society orchestra with the tux on, playing all the, you know. And then that evening, I was the opening act for Miles Davis.
Oh, man.
So I said, yeah, that's a pretty good day. You know, be able to play those 3 gigs. And I'm saying, now, who else could do that?
That's something to pay attention to.
Yeah.
That really is.
And I took pride in that.
Yep.
And but I just, those are the kind of experiences I've had, and no gig was too bad for me to take sometimes. You know, I always could get something out of it.
And that's something you don't learn in school. I mean, I'm not sure you can teach that kind of thing.
No,
but
not
you
really.
gotta learn to deal with the
Like if
different
somebody
experiences
called me
that
for
come
a wedding and I hadn't played flute for a while, I'd take the flute to the wedding. I'd practice it. It was a chance to play flute for 3 hours, get paid for it, get my chops up. So you can always make a positive thing out of a negative situation. Instead of saying, oh, I'm not going to take that gig. I'm an artist. I don't play weddings. Or, not that I play that many weddings anymore. I've been lucky enough to be able to just play jazz, really, the last few years. But it's the character actor idea, I think, has enabled me to survive.
I like that analogy. I may have to use that myself.
Feel free.
Thanks.
I use it all the time.
Yeah. What's it like trying to, with the small record labels, distribution and all that
Distribution is tough. You know, you're competing with the big boys. Like I just came back from Europe. I was over there for 5 weeks total. I mean, you see, I won't mention names, but you see certain musicians doing a Hewlett-Packard ad, you know. They're getting money from computer. I mean, these are, the big record companies put all their money behind something. That they'll invent somebody, an image, put all their money behind them, and just force them down your throats to the point where they become famous and make a lot of money. Some of them last because they happen to be good players, and some of them aren't so good and they don't last, you know, but that's the nature of the game. A small label is good in this respect. It allows you to record what you want to record. They're more interested in the music. I mean, they all want to make money, at least break even, but their nut isn't so high, and they allow you to do your own music. And to be honest with you, my distribution's getting better with Reservoir Records. I mean, I go around now. I just came back from Italy, Holland, and Finland, and the records are there. I mean, they're not there's not maybe 700 of them in the bin, you know, but they're there. And it's the kind of thing I think it's available, and if the people know about you, they're going to be able to get the records, maybe with a little more effort than just walking into a music store. They might have to find the address of the record label and what have you. But the good thing is you're kind of allowed to do the music, whereas sometimes when you are a prisoner to these big major labels, the short end of the stick is they control your music. And if you control an artist's music, I think you've just taken the life out of the person. I mean, unless they want to be controlled and their only interest is to be famous and make money. I got in just to play music, and I'm still in there to do it the way and I'm too old now to change, you know, as far as, I'm not going to sell out now. It'd be crazy for me. On the other hand, you never know.
You never know what kind of offer might be around the corner.
You never know.
You able to pick the folks you want to work with on most of your records?
For the most part, yeah. Sometimes, sometimes not. Sometimes, you know, politically you have to do certain things. But for the most part, I've been lucky. I've been able to have who I wanted. And even some of the ones that I didn't think were going to work out turned out great.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you just feel that you may not have a certain rapport with a certain musician, but all of a sudden that musician brings something different.
Yeah.
And it happens. So that has happened. So
Did we run out on our cassette? Okay, well, let's just flip it over and we'll be wrapping up here in a few minutes. I didn't ask you about, what, you had a year with Woody Herman?
no, hell no. How about like 3.5 months or something like that? There's two Brignolas. There's Mike Brignola, who is with Woody Herman's band now, happens to be the manager, baritone player too.
Oh, didn't know that.
He has the record for being probably, next to Frank Tabiri, the guy, the fellow that's been with Woody Herman's band the longest. He joined in 1979 and has been the baritone player since then. Coincidentally, we have the same name, we play the same instrument. He's about 20 years younger than I am. His name is Mike. And we think we might be related because his ancestry kind of is from the same area as Italy as mine. But anyway, to make a long story short, I wasn't with Woody's band too. I told you before, I didn't like big bands. I didn't feel comfortable in big bands. And most big bands didn't feature the baritone player too much. You know, the tenor, especially Woody's band, was mostly tenor. But I got to play a lot, actually, due to the efforts of Sal Nistico, who got me on the band. Sal used to say to Woody, you know, let him play, you know. And Woody'd say, well, we don't have any, you know, we don't have a chart for him, you know. Well, let him play on one of my tunes, you know. Sal was gracious in that respect. And I got to play, you know. And as I remember when I did leave the band, Woody said to me, man, we're just starting to write some charts for you. You know, why are you leaving? But it was at a time in my life when I had to get out. I just couldn't do it.
Was it constant road work?
Yeah, most of it was, but it was also like, there's an album called Woody Herman 1964 on the Phillips label. If you look on the back there, it was recorded the day Kennedy got killed, November 22nd. We were in the studio recording that day. And I had just, my second daughter was born, and I was kind of, you know, the president gets killed. My daughter was born with a liver problem. I'm on the road. I didn't really like it. So I just said, who needs it? So I left. Yeah. And those other two incidents helped me make my decision. Yeah. But it was a musical decision too. But what was funny is Woody asked me to come back. I mean, throughout the years, Woody would say, you know, anytime you want to come back, you know. And one time they were going to Japan, and I was tempted because I'd never been to Japan. I was going to go, and then something happened where I was going to do something with my own group, that fusion group I had, and I just felt, well, gee, you know, realistically, I got to do my own thing, and let's go with this. And in retrospect, I should have gone with Woody. But it would have been nice, you know. But I always saw Woody right up until he died. You know, the year he died, I saw him all the time. We hung out and laughed and reminisced and whatever. But
he had quite a character on baritone for a while. Was it Serge?
Oh, yeah. I heard all the Serge stories. What's funny is Serge Sheloff, yeah. People used to say, you know, you must have listened to Serge Sheloff. I never listened to Serge Sheloff. I mean, Serge died when I first started to play. And he didn't record a lot of records. I heard about him, and the few times I heard him, he didn't knock me out. I wasn't too interested. You know, it's like, well, yeah, he plays good, but I don't know, it doesn't knock me out. Right. But lately, I've listened to him. I've listened to some records that were re-released, and maybe, I think there were records that maybe were never released, some recordings. And he was a hell of a player, you know, so maybe maybe he'll influence me now or something. I don't know.
Well, you've been able to get together with some of your contemporaries on the baritone on a couple of your records, right?
Yeah. I recorded with a duo. The first time I ever did anything like that was with Pepper Adams, and then we did one with 3 baritones, Cecil Payne and Ronnie Cuber. And I just did one 3 months ago with 3 baritones, Ronnie Cuber, Gary Simolian, and myself, and we did the music of Jerry Mulligan. And we took all Mulligan tunes. And maybe Jerry would roll over in his grave if he heard us playing it, but it was some interesting things.
Yeah.
You know, 3 different guys playing Mulligan's music, of all musics. But one baritone is bad enough. We don't need 3. It was a fun experience, let's put it that way. I always enjoyed, you know, it's like having, one time I remember we had Harry Carney died, and we had 24 baritones in a rhythm section at St. Peter's Cathedral. Most of the people there just owned the horns. Maybe about 6 of us could play. But it was just, you know, just to see that many baritones, it was like, wow, you know, but it was like a sound I don't really cherish.
You know, there's been, I guess we can consider you an upstate New York guy all the way from Albany to Buffalo, and there's been quite a long list of great jazz players to come out of.
Usually, like from the center of the state, you know, you have J.R. Montrose, Sal Nistico, the Mangione brothers, and then on the west side, you had like Don Menza and Sam Noto. But I think I'm the only one from Albany.
You know, I just noticed a weird thing as you went through those names. They all end in a vowel.
Yeah, they all happen to be Italian.
What is it about that?
I don't know. They often used to say that, you know, like all these Italian saxophone players. I don't know. I think it's just coincidence. On the other hand, I don't know.
They're hot-blooded, I guess.
I don't know. It's just like they talk about the Texas tenors, you know, and certain sounds indicative of certain areas.
Right.
I never really heard those guys until I had already been playing. I mean, I knew Chuck Mangione and Sal, and I knew JR, but I didn't meet Sammy Noto until I had been playing maybe 10, 15 years. And I don't remember ever meeting Don Menza, and I'm sure that I'm leaving out some guys. I'm sure there's some other great players around. But we never really hung together. I mean, I was from Albany, and I never saw these guys. Once in a while, they would come to Albany, like JR. When I first met JR, he came to Albany to play a gig, and I found out he was from Utica, but I didn't hang out with him that much.
Right.
In our later years, we hung out, but so as far as influencing each other, I don't know. But there was a certain flair, I guess, that always people said that the Italian tenor players from upstate New York. So I'll go along with perpetuating that myth.
Yeah, why not? We'll start it. We'll start it up anew. Was there competition, and is there still a lot of competition to get what work is out there?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, there's only so much out there, and now you've got all these music schools releasing these kids that are great musicians. You know, and in many respects more well prepared for certain gigs than I'll ever be prepared for. But when I used to go do clinics, I used to make mention of the fact, say, listen, you know, after you leave school here and you're all prepared and you're ready to go do your thing, just remember, there are guys like me, and there's a whole mess of us out there waiting for you guys. And just remember, we're all after the same gig. So you better be ready. And it was when I first started to say that, I was trying to tell them that it's not going to be easy, that once you get out there, you're competing with everybody and anything. You know, in school now, you're only competing with little Johnny or little Ethel on the alto for the first chair in the band and all that. That's a simple situation. When you get out in the world, now it's like everything's up for grabs. And are you ready for that? That was my message. But then it got to the point where it was like, I got thinking, I said, wait a minute, there are so many gigs. I'm going to kill this kid when he comes out. You know, I'm not going to let him get that job, you know. And I would tell them that. I'd say, you know, when you come out, it's like a boxing match. I'm going to knock your brains out, so you better be ready to beat me up, you know, because I'm going to take your job, you know.
Well, you know.
And they would sit there and shake, and the music teacher would come up to me later and say, hey, would you tell him that? And then some of them would say, boy, I'm glad you told him that, you know, because really that's what it's about.
Sure, and they've been doing that for years. I mean, the Kansas City tenor battles and all that. I mean,
That's the way the music was brought up. There's a competition, yeah, but it's also a respect too. There's a competition, but when you know you're in the room with the same kind of, maybe not the exact. How can you equate talent? But I mean, when you're among company that you know as at least as your equal, maybe better than you or a little bit less than you, there's a respect there that. I mean, that's the way I feel. I don't know how other people feel, but I always have that respect for people, you know. And yeah, I'm going to knock your brains out, but when the game's over, we're going to sit around, hang, and tell stories and have a good time. Sometimes it's not like that. It's a very vicious, personal thing, and I think that's when it gets lost somewhere. But
Right. Well, we should wrap up. I know you have to go play some jazz.
yeah, we just got started.
Yeah,
This should be a 10-hour interview.
This is great. Well, we'll do part 2, actually. You know, when
That'd
you come
be
back.
great. That'd be great.
We think about, you're on your way to the gig, and how much preparation in your mind are you doing today for tonight's gig? Is there any?
It's all mental to me. Like 5 or 10 minutes before the gig, I start thinking about tunes. There's a feel that you get when you walk into the club. There's a feeling of, first of all, the audience helps. I mean, if there's an audience there, you feel, okay, yeah. I got to play tonight. You know, not that you don't have to play if there's no audience, but you just feel an obligation. There's people there spending money. Okay, you've got to bring it up to this notch, you know, immediately. But I started thinking of tunes and just different things to do to make this night a little bit more unique than last night. And I've always been a gamer in the sense that, you know, if I was a football player, I wouldn't want to go to practice. I'd be late. But when it came time to play the game, I'll kill you. I'm ready to play. So that's the way I am musically. I don't do any preparation as far as, you know, like I wasn't practicing all afternoon for tonight's gig.
Right.
But I'm ready to play, you know. And that's the way I like it. I like to have that little bit of edge. Also depends on who you're working for, too. You have to figure the capabilities and limitations of the people that you're going to play with and what kind of material you might have to play. Sometimes, I'm sure maybe you've been on gigs where the piano player brings a fake book, doesn't know half the tunes, and all of a sudden, 90% of your repertoire that you'd like to do is by the boards, and you've got to go in another direction.
Yeah.
So I think you have to be prepared for that. But
Yeah.
I just like to play. And I'm the kind of guy, you wake me up at 3:30 in the morning, hand me the horn and say, here's a half a cup of coffee, let's blow. And I'd say, okay. You know.
Yeah.
Whereas somebody else might tell you to get lost. I just really enjoy playing it. I think that's what keeps me going.
Well, you've got the Montalbano family on
Yes,
tonight,
sir.
and you should be able to play pretty much what you
Yeah, I
want.
really enjoy playing with both of them. They're both very talented, and young Rick, I think, is going to really, if he keeps his head on straight, he is going to make a mark.
Good.
He already has, as far as I'm concerned,
Yeah.
or I wouldn't be using him.
Right. Well, great. On behalf of Hamilton College Jazz Archive, I'd like to thank Nick Brignola for joining us. And
Thank you for having me.
perhaps we will.
And let's do
two.
part 2. Yes,
should.
I'm ready.
All right.
Come back with some more stories.
Okay, over and out.
Goes by quick, right?
Yes.